This is probably the most comprehensive video on YouTube explaining the most important love story in Chinese culture, Liang Zhu. Hi, you're watching Avenue X, where a junkie on good storytelling shares her thoughts, knowledge, and occasional weird ideas on stories and how they're told. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time and introducing the story of Liang Zhu in its most comprehensive form that I can imagine. I promise you at the end of this video, you're gonna become an expert of this story and probably know more about it than the average Chinese person that you're gonna come across. I love the story of Liang Zhu. It is very personal to me. If you stick to the very end of this video, you will find out why. But first, let's talk about the story itself. Liang Zhu, often translated as Butterfly Lovers, is the most famous love story in Chinese culture. It is eerily similar to Romeo and Juliet, and that is often how it gets compared to, because this story is also about star-crossed lovers, young lovers who die in the end. So in this video, I will first explain the story of Liang Zhu, then I will talk about a very important piece of music that is essential to the current understanding of Liang Zhu, I guess, in most of Chinese people's minds. And then I'm going to talk about my favorite film adaptation and TV adaptation, and then my own personal story. So this is going to be another very long video. Romeo and Juliet are the two names of the lead characters in Shakespeare's play. A guy and a girl, and it's their given names. Whereas in the Chinese love story Liang Zhu, Liang is the surname of the male character, and then Zhu is the surname of the female character, Liang Shanbo, Zhu Yingtai. And when you talk about the story itself, it is also very similar. Two young people meet and fall in love. They can't get together because of all the other reasons surrounding them. Eventually they both die. Yeah, beautiful. But they also have some very big differences, and that's largely based on the cultures that these two stories grew out of. In Romeo and Juliet, they couldn't get together because their families are enemies, right? Like, they can't wait to kill each other. Whereas in Liang Zhu, they couldn't get together because they belong to different classes. The girl, Zhu Yingtai, comes from a higher class, rich family, and wants to marry her off to an even higher social status family to raise the entire clan's position, whereas Liang Shanbo is basically a commoner. So that's the reason they couldn't get together. Then the second essential difference is in Romeo and Juliet, the two young people, they meet and they immediately fall in love, and everything happens super fast. As a kind of really unfortunate incident of two young people, two teenagers whose hormones are out of control. And in literature, there has always been a tradition of people playing on the idea that had they got together after they got married, would things actually work out for them. Whereas in Liang Zhu, the two characters, they meet at the school, and it's almost like a classmate kind of friendship. Really, that's the base of their love story. So it is very different from love at first sight or something that's really quick and like sparks and burns. It's more like a slow thing going on. Then the third essential difference is Romeo and Juliet has an almost definitive version because it's written by Shakespeare. It's one play, and it doesn't matter if people want to argue if Shakespeare is actually one person or multiple people, or which play is actually written by which, you know, like, I know there's a lot of theories about Shakespeare, but it is still considered to be one piece of work, really, a whole thing. And then there are different adaptations, there are musicals, there are operas, there's stuff, but the canonic version of Romeo and Juliet is there. Whereas in Liang Zhu, there's never a canonic writing about Liang Zhu. There's not a definitive version. It is more like a folklore that just showed up in history. It's more like based on oral tradition and different regional adaptations. So China has a lot of regional opera, regional singing traditions, and you can find a lot of Liang Zhu's story in different versions. And I've read, actually, people did essays and trying to find out what is the origin of this tale, this love story. and some people traced it back to actually two people. The story could be loosely based on, but actually they never met in history. So the Zhu Yingtai and the Liang Shanbo in history are actually not related to each other in any way. So this is a completely made-up folklore, idealized love story that gets worked on generation after generation and changed, and it eventually morphed into a version that everybody kind of agrees on. But there has never been one piece of writing that just says this is the definitive version of Liang Zhu, although there's a very famous Yueju, so it's a Chinese regional opera that is best known. So most of what we know today about Liang Zhu is based on the version of Yueju of the Liang Zhu tale. It's pretty complicated to actually trying to comb through the details of history. So the essential story of Liang Zhu is very simple. The girl comes from a rich family, wants to go to school, but she is a girl, she can't. So she dresses up as a boy. And in the school, she meets Liang Shanbo, and they become very good friends. 3 years later, she's supposed to return home. Liang Shanbo, as the big brother, goes to see her off. So they had this long walk, really long. On the way, she just signals him multiple times, like, look, there's a pair of birds, aren't they happy? You know, like they're married or whatever. And the boy is super dumb. And the boy says, but those are two male birds. Anyway, so they keep doing this on the whole way, and the stupid boy doesn't get a signal. So the girl at the end was like, okay, I have a twin sister who looks exactly like me. If you're interested in marrying her, yeah, come to my place. This is my address. And then if you come, I'll marry my sister off to you. And the boy says, okay. And the boy went to do his official exam or whatever. Eventually, he goes to the girl's home and realizes there's no twin sister. It's just her. It has always been her. And he's very happy. Suddenly, he's like, okay, I want to marry you. But the family doesn't agree because they have already arranged marriage for her to marry somebody even richer and, you know, like for the family's sake. So Liang Shanbo goes back home very sad, and then he got sick and then he died. Yeah, people die very easily in ancient time, I guess. So on the day, Zhu Yingtai is supposed to marry the man who is called Ma Wencai. On her sort of wedding procession, actually they go by the grave, the tomb of Liang Shanbo, and so she hops off and she went there to pay respect, and the tomb opened up and swallowed her, and she happily jumped in, and then two butterflies flew out, and then that's the end of the story. I know it sounds a bit weird when I say it like that, but essentially, okay, that's the plot of Liang Zhu. But there's one thing that I've always wondered about the implication. Say Liang Shanbo never actually found out Zhu Yingtai is a girl until that late. I guess he must have felt he's attracted to the boy version of Zhu Yingtai. And how do you make a switch from, I don't know, like a boy to like a girl without difficulty? Or had he always known that she's a girl, he just pretended he didn't, you know? Like, yeah, when you think about heterosexuality, homosexuality, it gets a bit weird. It goes to a very weird place when you think carefully about how that works out. But then, traditionally, actually, in ancient China, homosexuality is not really frowned upon. It's even sometimes very popular in the whole society. Maybe one day I should do a video about that. You'll find the interesting things about ancient people that you never imagined of. Now you know the story of Liang Zhu, we need to introduce a very important thing, which is actually music. Before, let's say, 1959. When people talk about Liang Zhu in Chinese culture, we talk about the story, the love story about Liang Shanbo, the Zhu Yingtai, probably the Yueju. But after 1959, Liang Zhu became something else because a new piece of music was written for it, inspired by it, named as Butterfly Lovers, and it became so important to the identity of the story of Liang Zhu that now, if you talk about Liang Zhu to any people who know about it, the first thing they will think about is the piece of music. The story of this piece of music is also extremely legendary. It's written by two very young people in their early 20s studying at the Shanghai Conservatory of Music. At the time, it was right before the beginning of Cultural Revolution, and their school had this project that they want to incorporate Chinese traditional operas or music into the Western classical music, because the Conservatory of Music, the school, is a very prestigious classic music school. There's a young man studying there named He Zhanghao. I think it was he was like around 25 or something when he wrote this. He comes from actually a family of Yueju, the play that Liang Zhu is most famous for. The whole family does that as a business. It's like his heritage, his father, his grandfather, it's like the whole family does that. So he's very well versed in the traditional Yueju version of Liang Zhu. But he also studies violin at Shanghai Conservatory. And then he has a classmate who is named Chen Gang, who is from a Western classic music tradition families. And they met and they were like, yeah, let's take on this project and let's see what we can do, if we can pull something from the traditional Chinese Yueju and then adapt it to the classic music. It took them less than half a year, so they started at the end of 58, and by May 59 they've already complete the Butterfly Lovers Liang Zhu 小提琴协奏曲 Violin Concerto, and they debuted the performance. It went really successful and it kind of became their graduation thesis. But a few years later, it was the beginning of Cultural Revolution, and this type of thing gets really suppressed. So it wasn't until the late 70s when Cultural Revolution ended that Liang Zhu, the Violin Concerto, became widely spread. But I know for a fact that it was really popular during Chinese Cultural Revolution. It's just people cannot play it in the public, and you cannot let people know you're playing it. My parents told me they were basically hiding in their dorm under heavy bedding and turning on like players really low to just hear it, because if other people found out that they're listening to Liang Zhu, because Liang Zhu is a romantic story, and at that time it is all like whatever capitalist stuff, you're gonna get into big trouble. But even during those years, Liang Zhu was actually very well known. And because it's so well written and so well integrating the two styles of music, it really is one of the most famous, completely born from China classic music written in 20th century. One is Liang Zhu, the other probably will be Huanghe, the Yellow River. So in the description, you will find two links to two versions on YouTube. One of the video is just a piano and the violin, and the violinist is from South Korea. I loved her play. The nice thing about that video is it's recorded relatively recently. It's 2016 and it's high quality. You can hear all the details, and also because there's only a piano in the back, so you can hear the violin better. The best thing about that one is she actually explains before she starts to play the whole piece which section means what. So what is the story? If you're not familiar with the tale of Liang Zhu, then listening to her explanation will help you understand the whole piece much better. Then the second video I linked to is a full version, so with a full orchestra. The violin is played by Lv Siqing, widely considered as the best Liang Zhu player. This is still relatively early version. It's him working with a Japanese orchestra, but I think it's one of the best versions I can find that first show you the whole thing and also have relatively good quality and also a good collaboration between the orchestra and the soloist. Whereas there are a lot of versions where there's always some kind of problem going on, either they're not working together very well, or it's cutting the piece into sections, whatever. So the version that I think I can find, I think I am happy with, I link them in the description below. Please go check this out. If you go away from this video, not doing anything else, please check out the Violin Concerto videos and listen to the whole thing. Listen to the whole thing. It's about 25 to 30 minutes long, depending on which version you're looking at. But it's so worth your time. If you haven't heard of this piece, you would really miss a huge thing in this lifetime. That's my opinion. The reason I talked about the Violin Concerto first is because that music is super important to both the film and the television adaptation that I really liked. First, let's talk about the film coming from Hong Kong, made in 1994. It's quite a long time ago, and directed by Xu Ke, led by Wu Qilong, Yang Caini, Sun Xing, and He Rendong played a tiny role, but then he's gonna show up very soon in the TV version I'm gonna talk about later. 1994, this Hong Kong version of film is still till today one of my favorite films of all times. It is the best version I still consider of Liang Zhu that I've seen on screen in terms of everything. If you consider the poetic, cinematic quality of storytelling in camera, if you consider the music and how it helps telling the story, the acting of the two leads, plus a lot of supporting roles around them. The pacing of the story, everything about this film is beautiful. Looking back now, so many years later, obviously you can see it is 90s film from Hong Kong. It is not super big budget. It has no CGI. It has no HD version. And certain parts, they had to rain, like really heavy rain on people and look super unnatural. But all that didn't matter. It is such a beautifully done film in every way. And I think I've watched it too many times. Not recently, but I think in my teenager years, early 20s, that I almost had the whole thing imprinted in my brain. Wu Qilong and Yang Caini, as two young actors that back then, did a phenomenal job of giving you a convincing Liang Shanbo and Zhong Yingtai. Yang Caini is beautiful, but in this film, because she was pretending to be a man all the time, she had almost no makeup on her when she was at school pretending to be a guy. She had this thick eyebrows and she had no like foundation, no like pale skin look on her face, no lipsticks, whatever. She just comes across so natural and so lively and pretty. And Wu Qilong, I literally fell in love with him because of this film, not because he was in the most popular boy band at the time. I loved his Liang Shanbo. I still think it's the best Liang Shanbo I've ever seen across the board, across the years. And one thing I really love about this film is they have the very well-known Huang Zhan, who did the original score. It takes from the violin concerto of the 1960s, and they played his own spin on it. So he worked the music into the plot, the actual plot, and he added his own interpretation and leading, like kind of mixing the violin version, the very well-known version, and then his version, and then leading into different theme songs of this film. It just works together so beautifully. The music, the original soundtrack of this one is also in the description linked below, and you can tell it's like a 1990s arrangement. It sounds a little bit archaic in terms of its arrangement, but it's so beautiful and it's so well worked into the actual plot of the film. So if you go and watch this film, you'll understand what I'm talking about. I don't want to make it a huge spoiler. Although Liang Zhu, everybody knows, everybody dies in the end. It's like, you can't spoil Romeo and Juliet. Everybody knows what happens. Another thing I really loved about this film is it did a very poetic, symbolic treatment to the butterfly story, because it's called Butterfly Lovers in English, right? And butterfly is important. But traditionally, the whole butterfly coming out of a tomb thing is a little bit too on the nose. You know, it's too literal. Whereas in this film version, it used a very clever way. Right from the beginning of the film, the butterflies are introduced, but they're used as symbols. They show up at different places and like different things, and it actually interacts with the main characters until the very end when they turn into butterflies. It is done not as the literal version of coming out of a tomb, but it is done linked to what happened earlier in the film with the things that they interact with, and eventually it gets sort of transformation into butterfly. It's done so beautifully, so poetically. Still till today, I think it's the best treatment of people turning into butterflies. It completely utilizes the strength of cinematic language, the cinematic way of telling stories. It is 1994, but I think it's so much better than so many films you see these days that came out of China that just completely lost that vision of poetic storytelling with visual images. It's sad. When you watch the film, you realize things don't progress in linear fashion, let's just say. This film, I highly recommend. Find this film, hunt it down, because it's really hard to find it. It's so old. I couldn't find the whole thing on YouTube. I don't think it's anywhere. Probably your best bet is going to search for DVDs, because it's so old. I love it so much. One of my favorites. When I think about it, I feel emotion, a wave of emotion coming over me. Then let's talk about the TV version that I also like very much. This is the 2007 version with He Rundong, Dong Jie. So these are the two leads. The funny thing is, He Rundong played a very small supporting role in the film version in 1994, Liang Zhu. And this time he becomes Liang Shanbo, the leading character. Dong Jie and He Rundong did a very good version as Zhu Yingtai and Liang Shanbo. This is a relatively sort of long drama, 40 episodes or so, and it also introduced Ma Wencai. So the man, Zhu Yingtai, was kind of engaged to marry in the lore, and added a lot of weight to this character, because originally in the tale of Liang Zhu, Ma Wencai is just there. Is the person that she is supposed to marry, but she didn't marry at the end. Whereas in this version, they become classmates all together in the school. And right from the beginning, you're introduced to this sort of third party in this relationship. So they did some major changes. Another thing I really loved about the drama version, 2007 drama version, is they actually invited back the original composer, one of the two original composer of Liang Zhu, He Zhanhao, as the consultant for their soundtrack. I don't know how much work is actually involved in terms of how much he actually worked on the music itself, but he is named as consultant and special consultant, whatever. And they did like over 18 original soundtracks for this TV drama, and they're all so well written. It's so much better than anything that you've heard at the same time of the dramas that came out at the same time. Even till today, when you listen back to those tunes, it doesn't feel out of date at all, and it's so well written. It's so well married into the tradition of Liang Zhu. And then there are two really beautiful songs, the opening and the ending songs as well. So the music added so much to this drama, and it is a relative to the original violin concerto. So that makes this drama the most special Liang Zhu drama I think I've ever seen. There are so many different versions. There are Taiwan versions. There's a new version that came out, I think, last year or something, that just looks completely terrible. To me, the definitive film version is 1994 and the drama version is 2007. I have also linked the 2007 original soundtrack in the description below. Now, we're at the end of this video, so if you're interested, stick with it for a couple of minutes. If you're not, because I love this film so much, one day I saw an opportunity back when I was in high school. We had this so-called art festival. So every year around December, one day they will pick, and then there's no class, no school. Everybody go to the school and to do all kinds of art stuff. So there's competitions going on, there's music competitions, whatever, everywhere. So you don't have to do any schoolwork just for one day. That year they were thinking about English play, and for some reason it's like really popular. They were saying if any class would want to put forward English play and sort of enter that for competition. So I really wanted to do something, and I wrote the script based on Liang Zhu, and then I got a lot of my classmates together to agree to do it, because it's China, right? Everything is about exams, so nobody really want to give out that much time to do something that wouldn't add to anything. So it was really difficult to convince everyone, but eventually we got there. And then I forced my dad to ask his friends to rent actual costumes from Sichuan opera troops in Chongqing. Borrow their clothes for our performance. When we put that very short play, which is Liang Zhu, but in English, it's so weird, I know, on, it was actually really well received. To the point that the next day, they asked us to do it again on a different stage of the whole school. So this time it was in front of the entire school, instead of whatever the small auditorium of the first performance. It was a ride. It was a crazy experience, and I happened to be Zhu Yingtai. I wasn't the first choice. Like, I didn't choose myself to be there. I didn't want to be there. I want to pick the prettiest girl who's also the best person, like whose English is the best at the time in our class. She's really pretty. She's like one of the prettiest person I've ever seen in my real life. And she would actually go with the boy very well, because the boy is super tall and I'm not tall. Like, we don't, like, I'll show you a photo and you'll know what I mean. I was like, you should go and become Zhu Yingtai. But she is too shy. She just refused to go on stage. And I was like, at the end, I couldn't convince her. So I like, okay, since nobody want to play it, I have to do it, then I just do it. The funny thing is, back then, it was like early 2000s. We had no equipment. There's no like mic, you know, like lavalier mic or anything. Like, you don't have that. But then the auditorium would not be able to hear you. And if you hold a microphone, then you lose one hand, and there are a lot of things you can do. So we actually did live dubbing. So I was on stage playing Zhu Yingtai, and there are other people playing their roles. We're only talking to each other we're still moving our mouth and saying our lines, but people, I guess, past the first 2 rows will not be able to hear us. It's other people who are live dubbing us under the stage. And the person who actually dubbed me is the pretty girl, the girl that I really wanted her to become Juliet. I even designed a poster for that English play, and I did 2 butterflies, watercolor butterflies, with a spring attached to them. So when they are up there on the wall, when wind blows, they would actually be moving, and it looks super cool. And people actually stole my butterfly. And I think before the end of the whole performance, my poster was gone. Somebody took it down and stole it and never found out who did it. It's a beautiful poster. I don't have a picture of it. It's now just in my memory. So it's just my personal story with Liang Zhu. I think there's some kind of weird karmic fate connection between me as a person and this story. And that's why I made this super long rambling video about this story. And I think I've introduced this story to the best and fullest of my knowledge to everyone out there who might be interested in finding out the most important love story in Chinese culture, Liang Zhu, or Liang Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai, or Butterfly Lovers, however you want to call it, it's the same thing. Thank you for watching Avenue X. I'll see you in my next video. Meanwhile, live long and happy drama watching.